Hey, good morning, everybody. So, you guys had a good break, hopefully. Any questions over the readings today? All right. Today we are going to talk about Eisenhower and his foreign policy. So, go ahead and get ready, and looks like you are there. All right, so how did the U.S. government get involved in a war in Vietnam?
Looking to prevent the spread of communism for that region.
Okay, we wanted to prevent the spread of communism. Who was fighting the war before us? The French. All right. So this is a really weird situation we get ourselves into, where we're fighting to force a former colony back under colonialization. And so we really don't want to do that, but they declare themselves communists, so we're like, okay, well, I guess we have to. So really weird situation. But yes, the final answer is communism, right? Which is sadly true for the next numerous years. everything, the answer is going to be communism. All right. So President Eisenhower is the president, right? What do we know about Eisenhower's background?
He's a war hero.
Okay, he's a war hero. He is the 5-star general that helped defeat Hitler, right? So domestic policy we've already talked about. He's trying to give power back to the states, back to the local area. But in his foreign policy, he says he's going to end the Korean War and he's going to push back communism. Now, those are kind of weird to say at the same time, right? Because the whole concept of the Korean War is pushing communism back. But he says, look, I'm going to finish the Korean War because I don't want people dying, and I will push back communism. So we have to look at how does he want to do this. He actually does have a plan. He says he's going to roll back communism without war. And the main way he does this is through what he calls massive retaliation. What gives him the power of massive retaliation? Okay, nuclear weapons. Who are the only 2 countries in the world that have nuclear weapons at this time?
America.
The US and the Soviet Union. And so he says, I will use nuclear weapons to push back communism and prevent them from spreading. Part of his goal, he says that if we spend too much money, that's what the Soviets are wanting, that if we get so far in debt that the dollar is worth nothing, then we'll go into another depression. And if we do that, the Soviets will win. And so he says we've got to cut the budget. We have to spend like normal people, not like some reckless maniac. And so one of the best ways in his mind to reduce spending, he cuts the size of the Army, he cuts the size of the Navy, and he cuts the size of the Air Force and the Marines. And this reduces federal spending considerably. But if you're going to cut the military, at the same time you have an enemy out there who is considering coming at you, what must you do?
Really get a lot of nuclear bombs.
Yes. So he buys a lot of nuclear weapons and he says, look, I'm not going to tell you when I will use them. I will just tell you that if you cross the boundary that I feel like is the wrong boundary, I will nuke you. Now, this reminds me of my dad. My dad always said that he didn't want to tell us, hey, this is this punishment for this thing, because he's like, you guys would sit down and figure out, is it worth it today? And so he just made this big threat. You don't want to do this because it won't be worth it. And so this is what Eisenhower does. He's like, you don't want to go anywhere because you don't know, it may not be worth it. And so this allows him not to say any specifics, but to kind of have this overall threat. And when you look at it, is he the guy that can make this threat credible? Yes. Again, he is the war hero that defeated Hitler. So the Soviets are like, you know what? We don't know if he'll do it, but it's very likely he will. The other thing he does, and one of the questions is the 2 ways that he influences foreign policy. One is nukes, and he says, you're not going to move forward because I have nukes, but how does he push communism back? And this is a different, more sneaky way. So anybody notice how he pushes back? There's a 3-letter organization that nobody really knows what they do, right? Say it again. The CIA. So he uses the CIA, he uses nukes to say don't move forward, and he uses the CIA to push back. Why would you use the CIA? I'll go ahead and ask you a question. What is one really, really impactful good thing that the CIA has done? Nobody knows. Why? because everything is classified. So we know the mistakes they make because they come out. But nobody knows what they've done that is, working. And so you can use them, you can accomplish things, and at the end of the day, nobody blames the U.S. because they don't know that the U.S. is behind it. So this is his methodology: is I'm going to use nukes to keep you from moving out, and I will use the CIA to kind of make things happen in your area. All right. So the first example he gets an opportunity to play in is East Germany. In East Germany, the government moves heavily toward socialization. In socialization, so communism uses socialization. It is, we will take over all of the land, we will take over all the factories, we control all the means of production, right? So if the government controls socialization and your main focus is to help everyone equally as a group, then when you think about that, if every single person in this room is told, hey, we're going to have the same grade at the end, right? How hard are you going to work? Yeah, I mean, because as soon as you realize that some people aren't working and they're going to get the same grade as you, you're like, well, I'm not going to work that hard either. And so that's what happens in East Germany is all these people are like, wait a minute, I'm not making any extra, I'm not getting promoted, I'm not, what's the purpose in me working extra? And yet what happens is the German government says, no, you guys need to increase what you're doing, and you're not going to get any more for it. Long story short, there are food shortages. They also close the churches. Why would they close the churches? Because they're communists, and communists feel like that the church takes your authority, and they want all of your recognition to go to the state and none to go outside. Now, this is a huge impact. Germany at this time is hugely Catholic. And so a lot of the people get really angry when they start closing the churches down. They are more angry when there's no food. And then when they start increasing the workload and decreasing what you're getting out of it, then everybody is just super angry. They actually start strikes. So again, you have loads of strikes within this socialist paradise, right? The workers' paradise. So the Soviet Union says, all right, East Germany, why don't you slow down just a little bit, ease up on the socialization, let everybody kind of get used to it. But East Germany says, you know what? No, we're going to press. And so Stalin says, look, all right, I'm going to try to calm everybody down. You guys want to have one country, right? So we will go ahead and unify Germany if everyone will disarm. Now, this is what, 1947, 48 time frame? What has everyone in West Germany just seen the Soviet Union do to countries that are disarmed?
Turn them into communists.
Yeah, turn them into communists, take over the government, take all of your factories, take everything that they own. If you're a West German, are you going to disarm? No. In fact, West Germany is like, you know what? Thank you for playing, but instead, we're going to go ahead and ask to join up with NATO. And we're going to join up with the West and their defensive alliance because we don't trust you and we want nothing to do with you. And so now, if you're East German, how are you feeling about that? You lose the chance of reuniting your entire country, plus the West is making loads of money, things are going well for them, and you're stuck in this country where nothing is going well. You can't buy what you want, you can't get the food you want, you can't go to the church you want. and they just get really super angry. So the strikes actually turn into an uprising where everyone just decides we're going to overthrow the government, and it starts in Berlin and the cities, and it moves out to the rural areas, and everyone is trying to overthrow the government. Now, if you're the Soviet Union, can you handle this? Can you let this go, I guess is a better question. Right. So what does the Soviet Union need to do?
Make an example.
Okay. The East German government is having a hard time dealing with this. The Soviet Union can't watch while one of their satellite states gets overthrown. So they roll in with tanks, and they roll in and they put down the strike, and they put down the uprising with the Soviet army and with tanks. Right? This is a perfect opportunity for Eisenhower to go nuclear, right? This is when he could say, you know what? Nope, we're not playing this game, and lob a nuke into the Soviet Union. Why would he not do that?
Because the Soviets would send one right back.
Because the Soviets have their own nuclear bombs, and he's like, okay, I want East Germany to be free, but I don't want a nuclear war. So this is when you actually see Eisenhower is kind of bluffing with the nuclear threat, because he could use one here, and this would be the perfect opportunity for him to say, let the states in Eastern Europe be free, and instead he's like, I'm sorry. In fact, he refuses any military support for East Germany at all. The U.S. has just come out of World War II. Are they ready to go back to war? No. Nobody in the U.S. wants to go back and fight, especially the guy that we said was our ally. And they're like, no, we're not. We don't want to go back and fight. And Eisenhower doesn't want to take the U.S. into another war. So the other thing is he knows that France has been considering becoming a communist nation. And he's afraid that if he pushes too hard, France will become a communist nation, and he will lose part of Western Europe as well. So he's like, all right, we're just going to back off. If I'm not going to move militarily, what other options does he have to help the East Germans?
Economically?
All right, money. He throws $15 million into food aid into East Germany. Now, how can he get this food aid into East Germany? If you think about it, there's only one real good way, because you have the Iron Curtain, right? What is the only place that we have behind the Iron Curtain?
West Berlin.
West Berlin. And so we just throw loads of food into West Berlin, and they smuggle it out into East Germany. How does this make the East German and the Soviet government look? Yeah, it makes them look stupid, because here I have the workers' paradise, and we're going to do communism, and it's going to work, but the capitalist nation has to provide food to the East German people. Now, the other thing, if you're East German at this time, what is your goal? Do you want to stay in East Germany? No. So where do you want to go?
West Germany.
Okay. And so a lot of the East Germans roll into West Berlin, and once they get into West Berlin, then the U.S. and the West German government secret them out into West Germany, right? What kinds of people do you think are going to be escaping?
Wealthy people.
The wealthy people, the people who have skill sets, the plumbers, the electricians, the people that can market themselves well and make a lot of money in the West, right? And so all of the critical skills that East Germany needs are leaving. And so now the communists are super embarrassed, and they just start arresting all of the people that are trying to escape or trying to strike. And the entire goal of the government becomes controlling their own people. Now, this is a very difficult situation, right? When the government's goal is controlling its own people, then you know things are screwed up. All right, so we're going to move from Europe over to Asia. Last we were talking, we were in the middle of the Korean War. I think we talked about the fact that it doesn't end in a regular, like somebody wins, right? So when Eisenhower becomes president, the war is still going on. He says, all right, we need to shut this down over there. And they say, yeah, whatever. So what does Eisenhower use as his method for kind of pushing things? Nukes. And he says, all right, do I need to launch a nuke into Korea? And they're like, maybe not. But what is the other thing that happens that kind of solves the Korean War problem? All right, Stalin dies. We talked about this last class period, right? All right, why does Stalin dying have anything to do with ending the war? Stalin was hoping to use the Korean War to get the U.S. to refocus away from Europe, right? Has the U.S. refocused away from Europe? No. And once Stalin dies, the people that replace him don't know all these plans, and they just see a bunch of Koreans and Chinese die. And so when the U.S. says, look, we want to end the war, China's already like, yeah, we want to end the war. The Koreans, they're not doing too hot, so they're willing to kind of end it. And they say, all right, we'll go ahead and end the war. The difficult part is when you end a war, the first thing that people tend to do is you give back the prisoners of war, right? Now, if you're North Korean and you were captured by the South, do you want to go back to the North? No. Most of them were like, no, we want to stay in the South. But now that becomes a problem because the North can't afford for the Northern Army guys to stay in the South and tell the Southerners what life is like in the North and how bad it is and what it's like in the Northern Army, right? So they're like, no, you have to give the POWs back. This is a really weird situation where the country that has the POWs, normally all the POWs want back and everybody just wants to go home. This time, the country that has the POWs is trying to be nice and say, no, we're not going to release them back to you. The other thing is, a lot like what we saw in Japan, if the North Korean POWs are released, there's a good chance they're going to be jailed or executed. So we just say, nope, we're not going to do that. And this is one of the big things that prevents the war from ever being resolved, is we just say, we're not going to release the POWs back to you. And they say, well, we're not resolving the war until you do. So you have the demilitarized zone. This is the first war since 1812 that the U.S. doesn't win, right? We just won World War I. We just won World War II. We think we're world power, and we are. And yet, we can't defeat Korea, primarily because they are getting Chinese and Soviet support. So we just kind of say, all right, we will have the armistice signed, and we'll walk away. Do we completely walk away from Korea? No. We leave thousands of people in Korea. In fact, while we were there, this is horrible, but we called them the speed bump. Anybody know why we would call them the speed bump? Realistically, you have a load of American soldiers on the demilitarized zone, but if the North Koreans ever decided to attack is there enough U.S. military people there to stop them? No. It will slow them down for just a minute, but the key part is if once they attack U.S. troops, what will happen in the U.S.?
Everybody will get mad.
Everybody will get mad because they just shot and killed U.S. personnel. And at that point, the U.S. will get involved. So we call them the speed bump because the whole purpose for them being there is not to stop the North Koreans. It's to slow the North Koreans down until the U.S. gets angry enough that they, engage again. So let's go. We're popping all around the world today because it's foreign policy. We're going to go into Iran. Why does the U.S. care about Iran? Oil. And so the Iranians have a deal with the British. In fact, I believe it's British Petroleum now is the company that they had their deals with. And so the British would pump out the Iranian oil. The Iranians would get some of the money, but the British would get lots of the money. In fact, more than half. And so the Iranians didn't feel like this is a good deal, right? Because it's their oil. So they elect a guy named Mohammad Mossadegh, who comes in as their prime minister. And as Mossadegh takes power, he says, you know what? This deal that we have with the British is not working for me. And so he decides he's going to nationalize the oil. And all the oil that comes out from Iran is going to be Iran's, and they will give the British what they choose to give to the British for helping bring it out. Now, if you were British, what do you think about this deal? Yeah, the British are furious. They're going to lose loads of money. So if you are British and you want the U.S. involved in overthrowing Mossadegh, how do you think you might convince them to do that? What is the answer to every question today?
Communism.
Communism. How do you tie Mossadegh to communism?
Soviet Union.
Okay. When he said he's going to nationalize the oil, what do communists do? They nationalize the means of production. They take over the means of production and give it to the nation. Now, in my mind, Mossadegh is Mossadegh thinking, hey, I'm going to take the oil just to help the government? No. So this is not, as far as historians look back, Mossadegh is not a communist. He is just saying, this is Iranian oil, it's not British oil. But the British are like, hey, he's a communist, we need to overthrow him. And at this point, when you say somebody is a communist to the U.S., what is the response going to be? Yeah, we got to overthrow him, right? So the U.S. and the British start planning a coup to overthrow Mossadegh. As the CIA is involved in it, all of a sudden they're like, you know what? We don't think this is the right thing to do. So they call off the coup to overthrow Mossadegh. But there's a guy in Iran who works in the embassy, and his name is Kermit Roosevelt. Anybody know who Kermit Roosevelt might be related to? Teddy Roosevelt. And if Teddy Roosevelt had the chance to get involved in a war, he's going to do it, right? Kermit Roosevelt gets the message. One of the guys pulls the message off and he comes running in. He's like, hey, Mr. Roosevelt, they say let's stop the coup. And Roosevelt goes, you know what? I never saw that message. The coup is going on. So on his own decision, Kermit Roosevelt overthrows Mossadegh and replaces him with the Shah of Iran, who had been kind of in power before Mossadegh. Now, the Shah of Iran is super happy because he got his power back. So what's he going to do for England and the U.S.?
Giving them access to their oil.
he gives all the money, and they actually make a deal that the British will control the oil and give the Iranians what they think is appropriate. Now, if you're an Iranian citizen, you're pretty ticked off about this, right? First, they overthrew your elected official, and second, now they stole the oil again. And the guy who is in charge helped them to steal the oil. So this actually creates a real problem. I told you right before this, we don't know when the CIA does something and it turns out to be a good thing, right? So the fact that I just told you CIA does this, what does that tell you? It's a bad thing. In 1979, under President Carter, the Iranian government overthrows the Shah and they take over the U.S. embassy and they hold our embassy people hostage for over a year. And they trace it back to this. They say, you guys did some horrible things and you guys are the great Satan. We're not going to let that get passed. All right. Then in 1954, the CIA helps overthrow the Guatemalan government. Again, what happens there is you actually do have a leftist government come into power. And when this government comes into power, they take land from all of the big landowners, and they divide it up into all the peasants. I know, if I can't even get through it without yawning, that's bad, huh? All right. Once they use the word nationalization, what does the U.S. do? Yes, we're really afraid. We're like, nope, that's communism. And so we go down and we overthrow the Guatemalan government. So again, we will see this becomes a problem later. All right. The other thing is Vietnam. Now, this one is going to take a while. So in 1859, what is happening in the U.S. in 1859?
Before the Civil War?
All right, it's just before the Civil War, right? So get your heads wrapped around, we're talking about right before the Civil War. Napoleon III decides France needs to be a world power. He actually goes into Mexico and takes Mexico over. He also takes an area here in what we now know as Vietnam, Cochinchina, and takes that over. Let me step back a little further. On this map, do you see Vietnam listed? No. Anybody know where Vietnam is?
It's the three on the side.
All right. So Tonkin, Annam, and Cochinchina, right? So for hundreds of years, when we talk about Vietnam, everybody talks about it's this one country. It was not one country. You have Cochinchina, which is very fertile, very like you can grow lots of good crops, especially rice down there. So very wealthy area. You have Annam. Annam is really weird. So it's this really thin area. Why is it so thin? Anybody know anything about the land?
Is it mountains?
Yes. So this area here is mountains, right? So it's kind of divided into two areas. You have a lot of fishing along the coast, and then the mountainous area are people who are just like, hey, we live in the mountains, nobody mess with us, we won't mess with you. So really wealthy. These guys do a lot of trade. They make decent money off fishing, right? So they're doing okay. Tonkin. Anybody know what Tonkin's claim to fame is going to be? And before you answer, I want you to look what is right next to Tonkin. What's right above Tonkin? China. Is that going to have an impact on them? Yes. China invades Tonkin all the time. So if you have a huge country that invades you all the time, what are you going to get really good at? Fighting, right? And so the guys in Tonkin get really good at fighting. So when they are not fighting China, who do you think they fight with? Yeah, they come into Laos or they come into Annam, right? So these are three separate nations with the three separate histories. How do they become one? When the French come in and they take over Cochinchina, they start making loads and loads of money. So then they decide, you know what? We're going to take Cambodia, Annam, Laos, and Tonkin. And so all five of those nations together become French Indochina. So they go from being five nations to one nation within the 16 years. Now, this happens in 1859, 1860s, 1870s, right? So they stay there for a little bit. What happens in the late 1930s and in 1940? World War II. And who comes in and takes over? Japan. So Japan is a very harsh country when they take over. So when the French took over, they basically say, hey, we don't want to live here. Some people live there, but they set up Vietnamese people as you're going to be in charge, you're going to kind of run things, then you're just going to hand us the money. When the Japanese roll in, they're like, all right, you're going to do things the way we want you to do them. And so they start pushing. The Vietnamese are very frustrated with the Japanese, and especially up in Tonkin, they start fighting back, right? And as they are fighting back, they feel like they are supporting the war effort. And at the end of World War II, if you support fighting the Japanese, what might you expect? What do they not have that they would like to have?
What did the Japanese have?
What did the Vietnamese want that they don't have under the Japanese or the French? Independence. And in fact, in 1917, 1918, when Wilson talks about how every nation should be able to have their own government and they should be able to do what they want to do, a guy named Ho Chi Minh is working in France. And he contacts Wilson and he goes, look, I agree. We need to give Vietnam their independence, right? We need to ensure that Vietnam has their own government. What does Wilson say to Vietnam? No. Why would he say no? Who controls Vietnam during World War I? The French. And the French are our close allies in World War I. And he's like, you know what? Sorry, I'm not taking the French off, so sucks to be you. Right? And so, if you're Ho Chi Minh and this guy says, hey, you should have independence, and you get all excited and you think that you're going to be independent, and then when you write him a letter and he ignores you, is there any other major world power after World War II that you can turn to? Soviet Union. And so Ho Chi Minh turns to the Soviet Union and says, will you give us our independence? And Stalin's like, yeah, no problem. Let's do it. And so he starts to learn communism. This is where things go ugly, because after World War II ends, he expects to have his independence, right? What do the French expect? they are going to take that colony back. And so the French come in and they are taking over, and the Vietnamese start fighting. The French are pretty stupid because they decide, all right, we're going to go face to face with these guys and we can defeat them. The guys in Tonkin have been fighting China for hundreds of years. They have just finished fighting the Japanese. They're like, no, we're gonna make this hurt really badly. And so the French roll in, and there's a place called Dien Bien Phu, and it's where different paths meet. Now, normally that would be a really good place to attack, except it's in the middle of a valley because, this is Vietnam, there's a lot of mountains, and so all the paths take you through valleys. So if you are a military person, do you want to control a valley or do you want to control the mountain? Mountain. All right, why do you control the mountain? Because if you have the heights, you can see down and you can shoot down, right? And so the French take over Dien Bien Phu, which is in the middle of this valley. The North Vietnamese, or the Vietnamese at the time, surround the entire valley and just start shooting with artillery into the French. The French are like, hey, we're in trouble, we're going to lose. And they go to the US and they say, all right, we need you to nuke the Vietnamese. Now, if you are Eisenhower, what is this going to do for the US internationally if we nuke the Vietnamese? Would there be any problem with this?
Yep.
Why?
Because the Soviet Union would start nuking.
Okay, Soviet Union might nuke us back. What are the Vietnamese wanting? Independence. That's really two-faced if we are fighting a country that just wants their independence after we had said, hey, one of the best things in the world is for everyone to get to decide their own government, right? So Eisenhower says, you know what? We will give you money. We will support France with equipment. We are not going to engage in this war. And so the French actually get defeated at Dien Bien Phu. And so they get driven out. At this point in the treaty negotiations, the North is actually controlled by communists now. The South is controlled by people who had supported the French. So now you have the ultimate fight again, right? Between the same thing that happens in Korea. The North is communist, the South is capitalist. They say, all right, let's go ahead and we will divide it in the center. And everybody kind of get their act together. And in a couple of years, we are going to have an election. And whoever wins the election gets the entire country. Now, when you look at this, does that seem like a reasonable plan? All right, a couple people said yes, a couple people said no. Why do you think it might be a reasonable plan?
It seems fair.
Because it's an election, right? All right, everybody gets to have an election, and whoever wins the election gets to have the country. Why would it not seem right?
Whoever loses is gonna just go back to war.
Okay, because the U.S. is worried that the communists are going to cheat, and if they cheat, then that's a huge expansion of communism. And we're all about not expanding communism, right? So Eisenhower rolls in, he's like, you know what? Not buying it. You guys are going to fake the election, so we're just going to go ahead and blow it off. We're really concerned that if the Soviet Union has created a communist China, then communist China is going to create a communist Korea, and then they're also going to create this communist Vietnam, and then communism is going to move into Cambodia and into Laos and into Siam, into Burma, right? And pretty soon you will have just whole expansion of communism. And so they go, nope, we're not going to do that. All right. And so that last part is called the domino theory. All right. Another area that we struggle is the Suez Canal. Now, why is the Suez Canal a big thing?
It's a big, what is that I'm looking for? The British use it for transfer of goods and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
a canal that connects Egypt to Asia, I believe.
Yeah, so this map is super small up here, but you have the Mediterranean Sea here, and if you go through the canal, over here, it rolls into between Africa and the Middle East, right? So if you want to go to Asia, from Europe to Asia, without going around the entire continent of Africa, going through the Suez Canal is the best way to do so. So you can cut off months of going around Africa, which reduces your cost considerably. The British have controlled the Suez Canal for a while. And they determine which ships go through, and they determine, how much money is going to be charged to go through, right? So, Nasser comes in, he is the leader of Egypt, and he says, why are the British getting to decide which ships get to go through? Why are the British getting money for allowing ships to go through the canal? And so again, he uses a bad word, right? What does he do? Okay, second word up there. He nationalizes the Suez Canal. Now, in his mind, when he nationalizes the Suez Canal, what is he accomplishing?
Anyone can travel through.
Egypt is going to be the people who own the land on either side of the canal get to decide who goes through the canal, right? They are going to be the ones that make money off of it. But when the US and the British and the French hear that, what does nationalization mean to them? Communism, right? And so the British, I will admit, I don't think cared as much about communism as they did, we're losing the money. So they turn to the US and the French and they say, help us take back over the Suez Canal. This time Eisenhower's pretty smart and he's like, you know what? We got played in Iran. This is not about communism. This is about Nasser controlling who gets to go through his own country and making a little money off of it. And he's like, you guys need to back off a little bit. So the British say, all right, we'll ignore the US, and they talk to France. Is there any other country that might fight the Arabs that you could depend on? The Israelis. And so they go to the Israelis and they say, all right, what we want you to do, we want you to attack and invade into Egypt. As you invade into Egypt, we will protect the Suez Canal from your attack and we will control it from then on. And when we do that, you guys can go ahead and keep this area here for you. So Israel says, okay, that sounds fine to us. The day the attack is going to happen, the Israelis roll in and they start coming across. The British are so excited about what's happening that they jump the gun. And they actually take over the Suez Canal before the Israelis get there. So they wind up fighting the Egyptians and the Egyptians only to take over the Suez Canal. At that point, is it obvious that their goal is just to steal the canal? Absolutely. And so the Soviet Union gets really angry, and they say, you know what? We're not going to let you guys do this. This is you as colonizers just taking over Middle Eastern countries. And so they threaten war. Now, if you're Eisenhower, this puts you in a really weird situation, right? So, what are Eisenhower's options now? He has like 3 that I can think of. If you're Eisenhower, what is one option that you think you could do?
Do nothing.
Okay, do nothing and let the British and the French fight it out with the Soviets.
You bomb them, I bomb you.
Okay, so you could pick a fight with the Soviets. Anything else?
Or he can get on the French and the British ass and be like, knock it off.
All right, so those are the 3 options he has. You do nothing, and that could lead to a fight between the British and the French and the Soviets. What happens if the Soviets and the British and the French fight? World War III, and the Soviets could very well win and take over all of Europe. So realistically, he can't play that game, right? He actually decides to do both the second and the third, but we'll kind of walk through that. He turns to the Soviets and he says, look, this is not your issue. We will take care of it. And the Soviets go, well, you better get this resolved because we're going to resolve it. And he's like, do you want to go to war? The Soviets go, no. And he says, all right, then you back off. You go sit down for a minute and let me handle this. And then he turns to the French and the British and he says, you guys had better get out of there and you better give it back to the Egyptians, because if you don't, the U.S. is going to come in and the U.S. will fight with you. Now, this puts us in a really, really bad situation, right? So we are threatening the Soviets, but at the same time, we're threatening our own allies. So how do the British and the French respond to this?
They get out of there.
They get out of there. The positive thing is, can they really turn to the Soviets for help? No. The Soviets already told them to get out. So it's not like they could say, well, the Soviets will help us. And so at the end of the day, they recognize that either way they go, they're either going to be in a war with the Soviets or they're going to be in a war with the U.S. And they're like, all right, we'll back out. And so they go ahead and they back up. However, right now, they get into a situation where the French are very angry with them and the British are very angry with the U.S. And so we have kind of a bad blood for several years because they're like, we can't believe that you embarrassed us publicly. We can't believe that you would not be supportive of us. We also told the Israelis, hey, you need to go back into Israel and you need to leave the Egyptians alone. Again, the Israelis are kind of ticked off about this because they're like, look, we were told to come in and we would take this land. And we said, nope, that's not your land to take. So you need to back off. All right. So next thing that happens is while the Suez Canal is going on, Stalin has died. Khrushchev is deciding, hey, you know what? Let's loosen things up in the East, in Eastern Europe for a little bit, and let people get their feet under them. However, this kind of backfires on him because now that people have a little bit more freedom, they're like, hey, we really hate communism. And so in Hungary, the people of Hungary revolt. They demand more freedom, the opportunity to elect their own leaders, and democratic political systems. The communists cannot allow that. So there is a guy that everybody likes who is a communist named Imre Nagy. And they say, okay, you take over and you run it and you be a good communist. And he says, okay, I'll do that. Once he gains control, he tells all the Soviets, you know what? Why don't you guys go away? I have this. Everybody trusts me. You just, back off and let me run it. And the Soviets go, okay, are you sure you have this? And he goes, yes. Right now, Soviet armies make this more difficult for me to run this. So you guys walk away. I will handle it. The Soviets actually believe him, and they send all their, the majority of their troops out. Nagy is now in control. And as soon as he is in control, he abolishes one-party rule. What does that mean for communism?
Basically abolishes communism.
Okay, because the people are not going to vote for communism, right? So as soon as he abolishes the one-party rule and allows people to elect whoever they want to elect, the communists are like, no, no, we can't do that. And so they actually come back. He withdraws Hungary from the Warsaw Pact, which means the military alliance with the Soviets. And so the Soviets roll in, and on November 4th, they invade Hungary. The Hungarians fight. Again, the Hungarians think maybe this will be the opportunity where Eisenhower will roll in with a nuclear bomb and save us, right? Does Eisenhower roll in with a nuclear bomb? Why? He doesn't want to fight against the Soviets. So, we can say that right now the British and the French are ticked off at him, and he doesn't want to create a big fight without their help. But I think this is the key where everybody recognizes Eisenhower is really not going to use the nuclear bomb to help Eastern Europe get free. He doesn't think that the US people are willing to do it, and he is not willing to go into a huge, huge war that he doesn't know that he can win. So they fight for a couple of years, and Nagy is arrested. Once you're arrested by the Soviets, you're tortured, and he is killed. At this point, Hungary is back under the control of the Soviets, and so everything is back like it was. East Germany is under control. Hungary is under control. No one else is going to try to overtake the Soviet Union for years, because now they're like, okay, all that happens is your leadership dies and you're beat down. All right. 1956. In 1956, there's another election, right? All right. Who is the Republican nominee? Eisenhower. All right. Who is the Democratic nominee? All right. So it's the exact same people as 4 years before, right? So what happens in this one? Some people are a little concerned because Eisenhower has had a heart attack, but most people are like, you know what? He's doing a great job. He is protecting us. We trust him. The Democrats, they say, okay, we're going to end the draft. But at the end of the day, they don't have a whole lot going on. The Soviets actually support the Democratic candidate. Now, this is going to have a negative impact, right? Do you want a foreign country involved in your election? No. So when you look at the election, it's kind of interesting. the Southerners are still not certain that they are going to support Eisenhower, but there are some Southern states that actually do wind up supporting Eisenhower because they say, you know what, we would rather go with Eisenhower than have somebody that the Soviets support. So, and I think a lot of them actually really do appreciate Eisenhower. So, very, very solid election win. And he wins the majority of the popular votes as well. All right. This is where we get into like the weird space race. The US and the Soviets get involved in trying to control space. Why do you think space is important?
Satellites.
Okay, satellites, but at that time they don't understand satellites as much as we do today. Satellites are hugely important today, right? Anybody use your phone to get somewhere? How does that work? Yeah, GPS. It works on satellites. Your telephones, your TV, anything you kind of listen to. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and we were talking to someone I think in Indonesia, and he's like, "It's amazing. It's crisp, it's clear, and there's no gap in time. It just sounds like you're talking to someone next door." And so we were talking about the fact that satellites have a huge impact. But at this point, there's one spectacular reason for us to be fighting about space. What happened that we built in World War II and the Soviets built soon after? Nuclear power. What is the only way in 1957 that you can take nuclear bombs from one place to another? Planes, right? Now, if you are taking a bomber with planes from one part of the world to another, is there any way that somebody can stop them?
Shooting now.
Yeah, you can shoot down a plane, right? But they have this new thing that the Nazis actually started, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. The Nazis came up with an incredible amount of technological advancements that helped the military. So the Nazis have come up with the rocket, and they used the rocket to launch bombs against England and other places in the World War II. But the techniques were not that good. The guy who was building the rockets, and right after World War II, the US and the Soviet Union actually roll into Nazi Germany and start stealing scientists, which is pretty amazing. It's called Operation Paperclip in the US. And we try to get to the nuclear scientists, we try to get to the rocket scientists before the Soviets do. And they try to get them before we can get them. Why would you want to push to get their scientists?
Because you can have very dangerous.
All right, because they are the most advanced people. So we actually bring Nazi scientists into the US and give them US citizenship. They never go to trial for their war crimes. They never go, get in trouble at all for being Nazis. We're just like, look, if you help us, that's all we want. So we push to gain all these different scientists. We bring them to the US and we say, what we want you to do is build a rocket that will go out into space and come back and bring a nuclear missile into a different country. Now, I will try to explain physics. I am probably not the perfect guy for this. I'm probably not even a good guy for this. But, all right. All right, this is the Earth, right? I know it's not a good circle, but. All right, so what do you need to do with a rocket? If I want to launch a rocket and attack somebody with an atomic bomb with that rocket, what are the two biggest problems that I'm going to have? Anybody know? So around the Earth is an atmosphere, right? What happens to the atmosphere as you go out? Okay, it gets thinner and thinner as you go out, right? So as you go out, it gets less difficult to move through the air. Now, I know you and I, we walk through the air all the time and you're like, no big deal. But what happens if you're moving at the speed of light through the atmosphere? If somebody was able to run super, super fast around the Earth, what? You would catch on fire because of the friction, right? So the problem we have is when you're launching a rocket out, it's going through the atmosphere and it's got to get through the atmosphere and through all this friction, right? So this is really hard to get it out. Once it goes around and comes back, the other thing is out here, you just kind of follow the Earth's gravitational pull, right? So you want to set it so it's not going to go out into space, but it's not going to come back too early. And then you have it come back. When it comes back in, it actually has a problem of burning up as well, because now it's traveling super, super fast. It hits the atmosphere and the friction will burn it up. So one of the problems that we have trying to create these rockets to explode a nuclear bomb is to get it out, and the other is to bring it back. So on February 7th, the Soviet radio reports that the Soviet Union launched a nuclear ICBM. The US has not done this. Now, they actually did launch a nuclear missile. And it's really terrifying when you think about it. Wow, they can launch a nuclear missile. Anybody notice what I didn't say that they accomplished?
That it successfully went to space.
That it successfully came back. So they were able to get it into space, but it burned up on the re-entry. And so we're a little bit nervous, but Eisenhower says, you know what? Don't worry about it. I don't think this is accurate. I don't think it's a threat. And so everybody's fine. But October 5th, the Soviets launched Sputnik. Sputnik is like this little satellite. The only thing Sputnik does, it has a microphone and it releases beep, 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 sort of like your microwave, right? When your microwave's ready. Is that a threat to the US? No. Why would a little thing going beep, beep, beep be a threat? But what does the US see? What do the citizens of the US see? What? Innovation. And we're really concerned because if the Soviets can put something into space that flies over the US, we don't realize how hard it is to bring something back. And we're like, oh my goodness, we don't have a nuclear bomb. We don't have a rocket that can take the nuclear bomb up and bomb them, but they have something that has gotten into space. They have the ability to bomb us. So this freaks everybody in the US out, and we are forced to spend billions of dollars to build the new ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, that can go out into space and come back, or the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile, which we could take to Europe and launch, and it would go and attack the Soviets. It also impacts the election of 1960 because Kennedy says, look, the Soviets have now taken over and they are more powerful than us and they are going to kill us. And so this is a big threat. At the same time, now we have satellites out and we are actually watching what's going on in the Soviet Union, but Eisenhower doesn't tell anybody that because it's still classified. Instead, we send planes over the Soviet Union, and these planes are flying at such a high level that they can't shoot them down. Problem comes one day, Francis Gary Powers, who was working as a CIA guy, is flying his plane. The Soviets shoot up a missile, and it takes out a portion of the plane. Gary Powers crashes into the U.S. He is supposed to just have the plane crash directly into the ground, burn up, and if he lives through it, to take a cyanide pill. Instead, he's like, you know what? Not going to happen. He crash lands the plane, and he's captured. And now the Soviets have the plane, and they have Francis Gary Powers. And so now the Soviets are like, wait a minute, you're spying on us. We're not happy about that. But at the end of the day, you still have the capability that you have. So now we're in the space race. The next thing we're going to talk about is going into the Kennedy administration, and this becomes an even bigger deal. What happens in the Kennedy administration that makes rockets and nukes huge?
The Cuban Missile Crisis.
Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, so we will talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis next class. All right, so what is Eisenhower's strategy to oppose communism? Two things. Nuclear weapons for defensive and what? Okay, so nuclear weapons are going to save money and be defensive. And what was the offensive method that nobody knows about? CIA. All right. Thank you. I didn't want to call you out. All right. So how does the U.S. get involved in the conflict in Vietnam?
They feared the domino effect.
Okay.
Domino theory.
We're worried about the domino theory. France tries to take back over Vietnam from the Japanese, and we say no. At the end, it's going to be a vote, and we're like, no, we don't trust a vote, so we go ahead and get involved to fight communism. And how does Egypt cause a crisis between the U.S. and our European allies?
They nationalized the canal.
Okay, Egypt nationalizes the canal, and the U.S., the British and the French and the Israelis get together and try to take it over. The U.S. says, look, Soviets aren't going to stop you, but we will. And so that ticks everybody off. All right. So Wednesday, talking about the Warren Court, civil rights, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right. I have managed to get all of the seniors papers and midterms graded, and I have gotten several of yours graded. I will try to have those done in the next couple days. So, all right. Any questions? I will talk to you guys later.